The story begins with a lonely and magical girl named Cairo. Cairo's parents have moved abroad, and Cairo is now alone with his time. Cairo likes literature and writing. He lived his own life. But he never left his city. However, today is a very special day for Cairo because he has found a writer who thinks exactly like her. That man was none other than a Cairo teacher, named Jonathan. We then see Jonathan, with some flowers in his hand, and he goes to his class where there are no students. After a while, Cairo comes to class and Jonathan questions her why he came now. Because the class has not started yet. Then Cairo says that yes, I know I came fast because I don't like crowds. Hearing Cairo's reply, Jonathan asks how far and where you live. I live in Lovell Hell, says Cairo. Jonathan then says, I thought there were only ghosts. It's really amazing. Jonathan asks Cairo about his parents. Then Cairo said, my parents are both lawyers. Jonathan then asks, do you want to be a lawyer like them? Cairo says, no, I want to be a high school student. My friend Winnie told me about school. After a while, Winnie came, who was open-minded and mischievous. The two talked together, then Winnie takes Cairo out for some food. After leaving Cairo, Jonathan saw Cairo's books, and then another teacher came and soon started reading Cairo's books, and found Jonathan was the author of these books. Jonathan, looking at his books near Cairo, is surprised. When he returns home at night, he tells his wife that a student has read my books. At this point Jonathan's wife receives a mobile call which leaves Jonathan unfinished. Then the two sit together and drink. But when Jonathan tries to go to his wife's mobile phone calls again and Jonathan is left alone. The next day Jonathan and Boris are seen sitting together talking, and Boris points forward and asks Jonathan, are there really ghosts? Jonathan says, why don't you go and see? Boris says, the ghost that lives there takes people's lives. Then Cairo comes out of the forest, which Jonathan is surprised to see. After Cairo stands in front of Jonathan, Boris leaves. Then Jonathan asks Cairo that you are not afraid to come alone from this forest. To which Cairo replies, I myself am the most terrible thing there is. Then we see Winnie, who is flirting with Boris and who wants her to join Boris's physics class. Cairo was watching it from a distance. After Boris leaves, Cairo tells Winnie, how can you be a lesbian and flirt with a guy? I like both men and women, said Winnie. Cairo is then seen smoking and says that I have no intention of making myself look good. Winnie says you can be hot and smart. I heard you're going to be a Victorian and you have a GPA of 4.6 and you've achieved so much. But Cairo accommodates them all. Winnie offers Cairo to write a teacher-student relationship and Winnie explains everything about the physical relationship and tells about her and Boris. Winnie even tells Cairo that Jonathan likes you too, but Cairo doesn't believe her. But then Cairo learns about Jonathan's physical relationship by reading his romantic books, and this is where Cairo starts to get attracted to Jonathan. One day in class, Jonathan asks Cairo to meet her after class. Jonathan meets Boris after class. Then Boris leaves. After Boris leaves, Jonathan starts dancing, which makes Cairo laugh. Jonathan also blushes when he sees Cairo. Then the two sit together and talk and have a good time and talk about the relic spider story written by Cairo. Cairo says that's a great choice. Jonathan then tells the story Cairo wrote, to which Cairo is surprised and says you remember that. Jonathan praises Cairo a lot and says you are really talented and says I want you to write a short story, just like her favorite writer. Cairo says that this is a difficult assignment and then Cairo reads the story written by Jonathan. Which shocks Jonathan because Cairo said it without looking. It means he remembers the story well. Jonathan says that the first time I wrote something romantic, I felt something but then I didn't write anything else. Cairo asks why. Jonathan says, because then I got married. Later I started teaching students. Then came the Winnie, and Cairo took it with her. At night Boris, Jonathan and his wife went to the restaurant where Winnie worked as a waitress. Jonathan also tells his wife and friend about Cairo, and praises Cairo. The next day Cairo comes to the poetry session where Jonathan and Cairo have a good time together. The next day, Cairo arrives in front of Boris and Jonathan with an interesting look. that surprises Boris and Jonathan. Cairo serves coffee to the two of them and compliments Boris on his biscuits because Boris used to make very good biscuits. When Winnie and Cairo come to Jonathan's class, Jonathan says that today I am going on a weekend with my wife. And going too fast. And then Cairo discusses the author of the story. And asks Jonathan to write the story again. When Jonathan leaves, Boris arrives, and it turns out Winnie has taken Boris's cell phone, so she can call Boris about lunch. Cairo notices that his phone has gone into Jonathan's bag, so he calls Jonathan and says, "You have my phone," and they talk. When Jonathan goes to Cairo to deliver the mobile, they become close to each other in the rain, and he later goes away with his wife for the weekend. Although Jonathan and his wife went on a weekend together, Jonathan's mind was still on the story Cairo had written, which was a romantic story where Cairo had written himself and Jonathan, which Jonathan felt himself and went home alone and take the feeling of a romantic scene. Here we learn that Jonathan used to masturbate a lot, and then the scene shifts. Jonathan returned to class and was very angry talking to Cairo. Cairo wants to know why he is so angry with Cairo. Then Jonathan said, "What have you written?" This was a story based on a physical relationship where Cairo broke the news to himself and Jonathan. Cairo says it's pornography. "Put it in your diary, not on my desk," says Jonathan angrily. And said, "Write a new story, with a new writer." Cairo understands what Jonathan is saying. He feels that and says, "Are you talking about us or story?" Jonathan said, "Both, because I can't do these things. If you don't write new stories, I will fail you." To this Cairo replies, "I wrote this story inspired by your story and now you are turning your back on it and saying it is wrong. If you want to fail me then fine, I want to see too." Cairo tells Jonathan very badly. And crying, he goes home and tells Winnie everything about what happened between the two of them. After returning home, Jonathan tells his wife that today a student wrote a story based on a relationship between a teacher and a student, and he tells his wife about the story Cairo wrote that. Cairo wrote the story with himself and Jonathan in mind. Jonathan's wife was in a very romantic mood, so they started kissing. But this time Boris comes to their house and they stop. Then the scene shifts and we see Winnie and Cairo. And see Winnie talking to Boris on message. Which Cairo doesn't like because she thinks all men are the same, so Cairo asks him to take off his shirt to change his mind. And the two started to kiss. Then when Jonathan went home, the vice president of the school called because their story had been found. It was actually Cairo's work, but Jonathan was too embarrassed to hear the vice president and told his wife about it. The next day all the students come to class except Cairo, but Cairo goes to the office to talk to the vice president, and the vice president asks if you two ever met outside of school. In response to this question, Cairo says that he once came to my house to return my phone, but there was no one at my house. The vice president questioned Jonathan about this, to which Jonathan replied that yes, I went, but I did not touch her. However, Jonathan was suspended as his words were not credible for the vice president. When Jonathan tells his wife about his suspension, she says you must have done something to her. And in this discussion the quarrel started between the two. Here we see Winnie saying, "Cairo, what are you doing and why are you doing this to Jonathan?" To which Cairo says, "He ignored me." Winnie says, "You are trying to get revenge instead because he rejected you. But I will tell everyone this." Cairo says, "If you say anything against me, I will tell everyone about you and Boris. I have proof," and then not one, but two teachers will be out of a job. Upon hearing this, Winnie says, "You're not treating me well." Cairo finishes and we see that now neither Jonathan has a job nor his wife, for whom he rejected Cairo, also abandoned him. Although Jonathan changed Cairo with his feelings, Jonathan was also changing little by little, and at the end Cairo met Jonathan. Seeing him brought tears to Cairo's eyes because Jonathan was the one who gave Cairo a new life. He felt some happiness and peace, and Jonathan was the hero and villain of the story to Cairo. Then this story ends here. So guys, if you like this video, please click the like button and subscribe this channel to get more explanations of your favorite movies.